Have you ever looked at your life and felt, deep in your chest, that you were made for something more? That the place you were born, the money your family had, the language you spoke, the neighborhood you grew up in, all of it, none of it was supposed to be the final answer for who you would become. And yet, somehow, day after day, you keep living as if it is. As if the walls around you are permanent. As if the ceiling above you is real. As if the story was already written before you even had a chance to pick up the pen. And the hardest part is not that life is difficult. The hardest part is that you already know, somewhere inside you, that you are not living at the level you were built for. Welcome to English and Spy, the channel where we learn the English language and the language of a life well lived at the same time. Because here we believe that words are not just grammar and vocabulary. They are the tools you use to build the person you are becoming. And every story we tell here is chosen carefully. Chosen because it has the power to shake something loose inside you, to wake something up that has been sleeping for too long. So if this is your first time here, stay, listen. And if this channel has already given you something real, something that moved you, then subscribe right now. Because there is much more coming, and you do not want to miss a single word. Today, we are going to talk about a woman who was born in a small house in Corona, Queens, in New York City, the daughter of immigrants, a girl with no famous name, no powerful connections, no money, no map, just a burning and almost irrational belief that she was going to matter, that her name was going to mean something, and not just to her family or her neighbors, but to the entire world. And what makes her story so dangerous, so uncomfortable to sit with, is that she was right. She was completely and absolutely right. And the question that will follow you through every single minute of this story is a simple one. If she could do it from where she started, what is your excuse? Her name was Estée Lauder, and she built one of the most powerful beauty empires the world has ever seen, starting from nothing more than a kitchen, a dream, and the stubbornness that most people mistook for arrogance. But it was not arrogance. It was clarity. It was the rare and terrifying kind of clarity that comes to a person who has decided, completely and without going back, that their life will not be ordinary. And she carried that clarity with her through rejection and failure and doubt and loneliness. She carried it like a fire in her hands, careful not to let it go out, even when the wind was strong, even when the rain came down hard. She was not born into beauty. She created it, and more importantly, she created herself. She decided who she was going to be before the world gave her any reason to believe it was possible. And that is where her story begins. Not with success, not with a famous product, or a department store, or a magazine cover. It begins with a young girl in Queens who looked at her life and refused, absolutely refused, to accept that what she saw around her was all there was. And if you have ever felt that same refusal burning inside you, then this story is yours. There is a moment in almost every great life where the universe sends a teacher, not always in the form of a wise old man sitting on a mountain, not always in the form of a famous professor in a great university. Sometimes the teacher arrives in the form of a quiet uncle who works with his hands and sees something in you that you have not yet learned to see in yourself. And for the girl who would one day become Estée Lauder, that teacher arrived early. He arrived in the form of a Hungarian chemist named John Schatz, her mother's brother, a man who had turned his garage into a small laboratory, and who, without knowing it, was about to change the direction of everything. Estée was a young girl when she began spending time in her Uncle John's laboratory, and what she found there was not just creams and chemicals and glass jars lined up on wooden shelves. What she found there was a world where things could be transformed, where a simple mixture of ingredients could become something beautiful, something that made a woman feel seen and cared for and worthy of attention. And for a girl who had always been hungry for beauty, hungry for elegance, hungry for a life that felt bigger than the one she was living, that garage laboratory felt less like a place of work and more like a place of revelation. And she absorbed everything. She watched her uncle with the kind of focused and almost desperate attention that only belongs to people who know, instinctively, that they are learning something that will matter forever. She did not just watch from a distance. She participated. She asked questions. She touched the materials. She learned the names of the ingredients. She understood which oils made skin feel soft, and which extracts gave a cream its particular scent. And slowly, with her uncle's guidance, she began to make her own formulas, mixing and testing and adjusting with a patience and a precision that was remarkable for someone so young. Because most young people want results immediately. They want the reward without the process. But Estée Lauder was different from the very beginning. She understood, even then, that mastery was not something you received. It was something you built, one small, careful step at a time. And she was willing to take every single step. What is important to understand here is that the kitchen and the garage were not limitations for Estée Lauder. They were her university. They were her research center. They were her first office and her first factory. And while other young women her age were thinking about parties and dresses and the opinions of boys, she was thinking about formulas. She was thinking about texture and scent and the feeling of a cream against a woman's cheek. She was thinking about what beauty really meant and how she could be the person who delivered it. Not just to the women around her, but to every woman who had ever looked in a mirror and wished she felt more beautiful, more powerful, more like herself. And here is the part of this story that you need to sit with for a moment, because it applies directly to your life right now. Estée Lauder did not wait for a perfect laboratory. She did not wait for funding or a business partner or the right moment or the right city or the right year. She worked with what she had, in the space she had, with the teacher who happened to be there. And she turned all of it into the foundation of an empire. So the question for you today is not whether you have enough resources. The real question is whether you are using the resources that are already in front of you. Because the garage is there, the teacher is there, the moment is there, and the only thing missing is the decision to begin. There is a word that most people are afraid of, a word that makes grown adults shrink back into themselves, a word that can stop a dream faster than any failure ever could. And that word is no. Just 2 letters, 1 tiny syllable. And yet it carries enough weight to crush the ambitions of people who spent years building them. Because the no does not just come as a word. It comes with a look, a dismissive wave of the hand, a short email that does not even bother to explain itself, a silence that lasts so long you begin to wonder if you were foolish to ask in the first place. And most people, when they hear that word enough times, begin to believe it. They begin to think that the no is not just an answer but a verdict, not just a rejection but a definition of who they are and what they deserve. Estée Lauder heard no more times than most people could count. She walked into beauty salons and hotels and social clubs with her small jars of cream and her enormous belief in what she had made. And she was turned away, ignored, laughed at, treated as if she were a nuisance, as if her presence in those elegant spaces was somehow inappropriate, as if a woman from Queens, with immigrant parents, and no famous name had no business standing in rooms where decisions were made, and a smaller person, a person who had not yet decided completely who they were going to be, would have taken those rejections home and quietly put the jars away and found something safer to do with their life. But Estée Lauder was not that person. She was never that person. What she did instead was something that the business world would later study and admire and try to copy. But at the time it seemed almost absurdly simple. She started giving her products away for free. She would approach a woman, sometimes a stranger, and she would say, "Let me show you something." And she would take the cream and apply it to the woman's skin with her own hands, gently and confidently. And she would explain what it did and how it worked and why it was different from everything else the woman had ever tried. And this act, this small and personal and deeply human act, was revolutionary, because nobody was doing it. The beauty industry at that time sold products behind glass counters, with formal and distant saleswomen who spoke to customers as if they were doing them a favor. And here was Estée Lauder, touching people, connecting with them, making them feel like they mattered. She understood something about human beings that most businesses completely miss. She understood that people do not just buy products, they buy feelings. They buy the experience of being seen and valued and cared for. They buy the moment when someone looks at them and says, "You are worth my full attention." And every free sample she gave, Every face she touched, every woman she looked directly in the eyes and told you deserved to feel beautiful, was a demonstration of that understanding. It was marketing, but it was also something deeper than marketing. It was a philosophy, a belief about what people need and what a business can be when it decides to genuinely serve the human beings it was built for. And here is where this connects to you, because you are also selling something. Maybe not a cream, maybe not a beauty product, but you are selling your ideas, your work, your skills, your presence, your vision. And the question is whether you are willing to give something first before you ask for anything back. Whether you are willing to touch people with what you have, literally or figuratively. Whether you are willing to show up again and again, even when the door closes in your face. Because Estée Lauder did not get to the top by waiting for people to come to her. She went to them. She found them. She moved toward the rejection instead of away from it. And that movement, that stubborn and fearless movement toward the no, was the beginning of everything. There is a difference between knocking on a door and deciding that the door will open. Most people knock and then step back and wait and hope and worry and eventually walk away. They treat the door as if it belongs to someone else, as if the decision of whether it opens or stays closed is completely out of their hands. And in a way that is true, you cannot force a door open. You cannot demand that the world receive you before you have given it a reason to. But what you can do, what the truly determined person learns to do, is to make it impossible for the door to stay closed forever. Not through aggression, not through desperation, but through a quiet and relentless and almost supernatural persistence that eventually makes the person on the other side of the door more tired of saying no than you are of hearing it. Estée Lauder wanted to be in Saks Fifth Avenue, not because it was just a store, but because it was a symbol. It was the kind of place that told the world a product was serious, that a brand had arrived, that a woman with a dream from Queens had crossed over into a different category of existence. And when she first approached Saks, they were not interested. They were polite in the way that powerful institutions are polite when they want you to disappear quietly. They smiled and nodded and said nothing that sounded like yes. And a different woman would have accepted that response and gone home and told herself that at least she tried. But Estée Lauder did not go home. She went to work. What she did next is one of the most studied and celebrated moves in the history of business. And yet when you hear it, it sounds almost too simple, too obvious, too human to be considered a strategy. She attended a charity luncheon where many of the women who shopped at Saks would be present, and she brought her products, and she gave them away, freely and generously, to the right women in the right room. And those women used the products and felt the difference and talked about them. And the conversations traveled, as conversations among influential women always do, quickly and powerfully, and in directions that no advertisement could have engineered. And suddenly Saks Fifth Avenue was receiving requests, real requests from real customers, asking for products by a woman named Estée Lauder. And here is the lesson that you need to burn into your mind, because it is one of the most important things this story will teach you. Estée Lauder did not wait for permission. She did not wait for Saks to decide she was ready. She went around the wall. She created the demand herself. She manufactured the circumstance that made the opportunity inevitable. And when Saks finally called her, it was not because they had suddenly recognized her genius. It was because their own customers had made it impossible for them to ignore her any longer. She had turned the market into a voice. She had turned other people's experiences into a most powerful argument. And the door that had been closed opened, not because someone on the inside decided to be generous, but because Estée Lauder had made closing it too expensive. This is what separates the people who build something real from the people who spend their lives waiting for someone to notice them. It is not talent. It is not luck. It is not connections or money or the right last name. It is the willingness to think differently about obstacles. To look at a wall and ask not, how do I break through it? But how do I make the wall irrelevant? And Estée Lauder asked that question every single time she was told no. Every single time the room was closed to her. Every single time the world tried to remind her of where she came from. She refused to accept the premise that the obstacle was permanent. And that refusal, that deep and stubborn and creative refusal, is available to you right now, today, in whatever situation is making you feel stuck. The question is simply whether you are willing to use it. There is something that nobody tells you when you decide to build something great with your life. Something that the success stories leave out because it is uncomfortable and it does not fit neatly into the narrative of triumph that we all want to believe in. And that thing is this: the people closest to you will not always understand. They will not always support you. They will not always be able to see what you see. And sometimes the very relationships that are supposed to give you strength will become the places where your dream feels most fragile, most questioned, most at risk of being quietly talked out of existence by the voices of people who love you but who are also afraid. Afraid of change, afraid of failure, afraid of what it means if you succeed. And the life you share together has to become something different from what it was. Estée Lauder married Joseph Lauder in 1930, a young man who believed in her, who worked beside her, who understood that she was not an ordinary woman with ordinary ambitions. And for a time, their life together moved forward with the energy of two people building something side by side. But the pressure of ambition is a strange and powerful force. It does not always bring people together. Sometimes it reveals the distance between them, the different speeds at which they move, the different levels of hunger they carry. And by 1939, Estée and Joseph had divorced, and she found herself alone in a way that was not just personal, but existential. Because the business and the marriage had been so deeply connected that separating one from the other felt like trying to separate fire from heat. But here's what Estée Lauder did with that loneliness, and that pain, and that radical uncertainty about what her life was going to look like. She worked. She did not collapse into the story of a woman abandoned. She did not let the divorce become the loudest thing about her. She let it become fuel. She let the pain sharpen her focus instead of scatter it. And she moved forward with a clarity and a velocity that actually increased after the marriage ended, as if the removal of that particular tension had freed something in her that had been waiting for space to grow. And this is not a cold or unfeeling response to heartbreak. It is actually one of the most human responses possible. It is the response of a person who has decided that their pain will serve their purpose rather than consume it. In 1942, just a few years after the divorce, Estée Lauder made a decision that surprised everyone who thought they understood her story. She remarried Joseph. She brought him back into her life and back into the business. Not because she had forgotten what had broken them apart, but because she had grown large enough to hold both the wound and the wisdom it had given her. And together they rebuilt, not just the marriage, but the company, with a new seriousness and a new shared understanding of what they were building and what it was going to demand from both of them. And this time they moved forward not as two young people full of romantic energy, but as two adults who had chosen each other again with open eyes and full knowledge of the cost. What this chapter of Estée Lauder's life is really about is not romance, and it is not even business. It is about the relationship between personal sacrifice and professional ambition. It is about the brutal and beautiful truth that building something great will cost you something personal. It will test your relationships. It will ask you to make choices that do not have clean or comfortable answers. And the people who succeed are not the ones who avoid that cost. They are the ones who pay it consciously, who look at what they are trading and decide that the vision is worth it, not because they do not feel the loss, but because they feel it fully and keep moving anyway. And if you are sitting right now with a dream in one hand and a fear of what it will cost you in the other, Estée Lauder's life is asking you directly, what are you willing to pay? And are you brave enough to pay it? There is a moment in the life of every great builder when everything they have been preparing for, every skill they have developed in silence, every rejection they have survived, every relationship they have sacrificed, every early morning and every late night and every hour spent working, when the rest of the world was resting, all of it suddenly converges into a single product, a single idea, a single moment of clarity so precise and so powerful that it changes not just their business, but the entire landscape of the industry they are working in. And when that moment arrives, it does not always look like a revolution from the outside. It does not always arrive with trumpets. and announcements. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the form of a small brown bottle sitting on a bathroom shelf, waiting for the world to understand what it is holding. In 1953, Estée Lauder launched a product called Youth Dew. And if you do not know what Youth Dew is, you need to understand what it meant. Not just as a product, but as an idea. Because the idea behind it was as radical and as important as the formula itself. Before, Youth Dew fragrance was something that a woman received as a gift. It was something a man bought for a woman. It was positioned as a luxury that a woman did not purchase for herself, but waited to be given, as if her own desire for beauty and scent and pleasure was not sufficient justification for spending money. As if she needed someone else's permission to smell wonderful. And Estée Lauder looked at that assumption and decided, with the calm certainty of someone who has spent years studying what women actually want, that it was completely and utterly wrong. Youth Dew was a bath oil. They could also be worn as a perfume, and it was priced at a point that women could afford to buy for themselves, without waiting, without asking, without needing a special occasion or a generous husband or a holiday to justify the purchase. And Estée Lauder marketed it directly to women as something they deserved to give themselves. And the response was immediate and overwhelming, because she had not just created a product, she had given women permission. She had looked at an entire generation of women who had been taught to wait, and she had said, "You do not have to wait. You can choose this for yourself. Right now. Today. Because you are worth it." And that message, wrapped inside a small brown bottle of bath oil, traveled farther and faster than any advertisement she could have bought. The numbers tell part of the story, but not all of it. In its first year, Youth Dew generated sales that transformed Estée Lauder, incorporated from a small and promising company into something that could no longer be ignored. It gave the business the financial foundation it needed to expand, to hire, to enter new markets, to dream at a larger scale. But the more important thing that Youth Dew did was prove something about Estée Lauder as a thinker. It proved that she understood people at a level that went far beyond surface observation. She understood the emotional architecture of her customer. She understood what women carried silently, what they wished for but did not say out loud, and she built a product that spoke directly to that unspoken wish. And that is a level of empathy that cannot be taught in any school or learned from any textbook. And here is what this means for you. Because there is a Youth Dew in your life right now. There is an idea, or a product, or a service, or a skill that you are sitting on. Something that you can feel is important. Something that you know in your bones would matter to people if you would just bring it out into the world. And the reason you have not brought it out yet is probably not that you lack the ability. It is more likely that you are still waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for someone to give you permission, waiting for the world to come to you instead of deciding to go to the world. And Estée Lauder's life is telling you, directly and without any gentleness, that the permission is never coming from the outside. The permission has always been yours to give yourself. So the only question that remains is when you are going to give it. There is a particular kind of loneliness that belongs only to the person who is building something that has never been built before. It is not the loneliness of being physically alone. It is the loneliness of having a vision that exists fully and completely inside your mind, but that the people around you can only see in fragments, in pieces, in partial and sometimes distorted versions of what you know it will eventually become. And this loneliness is not a sign that something is wrong. It is actually a sign that something is profoundly right. It is the necessary condition of every pioneer, every builder, every person who has decided to create something that the world does not yet have a category for. And Estée Lauder lived inside that loneliness for years, carrying the full weight of a vision that the market was not yet ready to receive at the scale she intended. After the success of Youth Dew, the natural next step for most business owners would have been to consolidate, to protect what had been built, to enjoy the stability that finally seemed within reach. But Estée Lauder was not built for consolidation. She was built for expansion, and she turned her eyes toward Europe with the same focused hunger she had once turned toward Saks Fifth Avenue. because she understood that a truly great brand does not belong to one city or one country. It belongs to every woman in every place who has ever stood in front of a mirror and wanted to feel more beautiful, more powerful, more completely herself. And she was going to find every one of those women no matter where they lived or what language they spoke. The expansion into Europe was not smooth, and it was not quick, and it was not welcomed with the kind of open arms that a lesser person might have expected after building such a powerful brand in the United States. The European market was sophisticated and proud and deeply attached to its own traditions of beauty and luxury. And here was an American woman, the daughter of immigrants, arriving with her products and her philosophy and her absolute certainty that what she had built deserved a place on the shelves of the finest stores in London and Paris and beyond. And the resistance she encountered was real and serious, and came from people who had every institutional advantage over her, except one. They did not have her hunger, and hunger, when it is deep enough and sustained enough, defeats advantage almost every single time. She traveled personally. She did not send representatives or agents or carefully worded letters. She went herself. She walked into the rooms. She put her products on the counters. She demonstrated them on the skin of the buyers and the managers and anyone else who would give her 5 minutes of their attention. And she brought with her the same philosophy that had worked in New York. The belief that the most powerful sales tool in the world is not an advertisement or a price point or a famous name. It is a human being who genuinely believes in what they are offering and who is willing to make that belief visible and personal and impossible to dismiss. And slowly, the way that water eventually shapes stone, not through force, but through persistence, the European market began to open. What Estée Lauder was building during these years of expansion was not just a company. She was building a proof, a living and growing proof, that the story you are born into does not have to be the story you die inside of, that the accent you speak with, and the neighborhood you come from, and the money your parents had, are not the measurements of what you are capable of becoming. And every new country she entered, every new store that agreed to carry her name, every new woman who picked up one of her products and felt something shift inside her, all of it was another brick in that proof. And she laid those bricks one by one with her own hands, never asking the world to do for her what she was fully prepared to do for herself. And that is a standard that this story is now quietly placing in front of you, asking you without words whether you are ready to meet it. There is a truth about human beings that the modern world of business has spent billions of dollars trying to digitize and automate and scale into something that can be managed by algorithms and data points and carefully constructed funnels. And that truth is devastatingly simple. People need to be touched, not always literally, not always physically, but they need to feel the presence of another human being who sees them, who acknowledges them, who treats them not as a transaction or a target or a demographic segment, but as a real person with real feelings and real desires and a real hunger to be valued. And in a world that keeps moving faster and colder and more distant, the person or the brand that remembers this truth and builds it into everything they do will always have an advantage that no amount of money or technology can fully replicate. Estée Lauder understood this truth not as a business strategy, but as a personal philosophy. It was not something she learned from a book or a mentor or a marketing course. It was something she felt in her body, in her hands, in the way she had watched her Uncle John work in his laboratory with care and precision and love for what he was creating. And she carried that understanding into every single customer interaction she ever had. She believed that the moment between a woman and a product was sacred. It was a moment of potential transformation, and she refused to let that moment be handled carelessly or impersonally or with the kind of transactional efficiency that treats a human being like an obstacle between a company and its revenue. Her most famous innovation in this area was something the industry eventually called the gift with purchase, a concept so simple and so effective that every major beauty brand in the world eventually copied it. But when Estée Lauder introduced it, it was considered unusual, even strange. The idea was straightforward. When a customer bought a product above a certain value, she received a small gift, a collection of sample-sized products in a beautiful little bag, freely given, with warmth and genuine generosity. And the effect this had on customers was profound and lasting, because it did not just create satisfaction, it created loyalty. It created the feeling that this brand understood something about giving that other brands did not. And that feeling, that emotional residue left behind by a generous act, is worth more than any advertisement ever printed. But the gift with purchase was only the most visible expression of a deeper principle that ran through everything Estée Lauder built. And that principle was this: every point of contact between your brand and a human being is an opportunity to make that person feel better about themselves. Not just about your product, not just about their purchase, but about themselves, their worth, their beauty, their right to take up space and feel wonderful and be seen. And she applied this principle with a consistency and an attention to detail that was almost obsessive, because she knew that trust is not built in grand gestures. It is built in the accumulation of small moments, handled with care. Small moments where a person feels that someone on the other side of the counter actually gives a genuine and unreserved damn about their experience. And this is the part of Estée Lauder's philosophy that belongs to you most directly. Because whatever you are building, whatever you are creating, whatever service or product or idea you are trying to bring into the world, the question that should be driving every decision you make is not, how do I make more money, or how do I scale faster, or how do I beat my competition? The question should be, how do I make the person in front of me feel that they matter? How do I make this interaction leave them feeling better than they felt before they found me? Because the brands and the businesses and the people who answered that question honestly and act on the answer consistently are the ones who build something that lasts, something that people come back to, not just because it works, but because it makes them feel seen. And in a world that is increasingly efficient at making people feel invisible, being the one who makes them feel seen is not just good business. It is a form of power that nothing else can match. There is a price that comes with building something that lasts, a price that is rarely discussed in the celebrations and the magazine covers and the award ceremonies and the speeches where successful people stand behind podiums and make their journey sound like a series of bold and confident decisions that always pointed in the right direction. Because the truth is messier and heavier and more human than that. The truth is that every empire has a shadow. And the shadow of Estée Lauder's empire was the same shadow that follows every person who burns at the level she burned. It was the shadow of time, of presence, of the moments that were given to the business instead of to the people she loved, of the version of herself that existed only in the space between ambition and everything ambition asks you to leave behind. Her children grew up inside the orbit of a mother who was extraordinary and driven and present in the way that a force of nature is present. Powerful and undeniable and sometimes overwhelming. And her son Leonard, who would eventually take the company and grow it into a publicly traded global corporation worth billions, once described his mother with a combination of admiration and a kind of careful honesty that only a child of a great person can fully articulate. He saw her genius clearly. He understood what she had built and what it had cost, and he carried both of those things with him as he stepped into the role of continuing what she had started, understanding that the name above the door was not just a brand but a biography, not just a logo but a life. In 1967, Estée Lauder was awarded the Neiman Marcus Award for Distinguished Service in the field of fashion, one of the most prestigious recognitions in the American luxury industry. And the awards and the recognitions kept coming after that, each one a formal acknowledgement from the world that what she had built was real and significant and worthy of the kind of attention that had once been denied to a young woman from Queens with cream in her hands and a dream too large for the room she was standing in. And Time magazine eventually named her one of the 20 most influential business geniuses of the 20th century, the only self-made woman on that entire list. A fact that should stop you for a moment. A fact that should sit with you and mean something. The only self-made woman on a list of 20, surrounded by names that had the full weight of institutional support and inherited advantage, and a world that was structurally designed to help them succeed. And there she was, the daughter of immigrants, the girl from the kitchen laboratory, the woman who had been turned away from department stores and laughed at by buyers and dismissed by an industry that did not yet understand what she represented. And she had outlasted all of it. She had outworked all of it. She had outdreamed all of it. And the recognition that came in the later years of her life was not a gift from the world. It was a debt the world was finally paying, slowly and imperfectly, for all the years it had made her fight for what should have been obvious from the beginning. But here is what that recognition could not give back. And this is the part of the story that you need to carry with you into the final moments of this narration. It could not give back the quiet evenings. It could not give back the unhurried mornings. It could not give back the version of herself that existed before the hunger became the whole of her identity. And this is not a warning against ambition. It is something more nuanced and more important than that. It is an invitation to ask yourself right now, before you have built the empire, before the price has been fully paid, what kind of success you are actually chasing, whether the life you are building has room not just for achievement, but for the kind of moments that achievement cannot purchase. Because Estée Lauder built one of the most beautiful and powerful brands the world has ever seen, and she paid for it with the currency that every human being carries in equal measure regardless of talent or wealth or determination. She paid for it with time, and time. Unlike money, unlike opportunity, unlike second chances, time does not come back. So here we are, at the end of a life that was never ordinary, never safe, never small. A life that began in a modest house in Queens, with immigrant parents and a hunger that had no name yet. A life that moved through rejection and failure and personal heartbreak and institutional resistance, and every variety of know that the world knows how to deliver, and arrived, finally, at the kind of place that most people only ever see from the outside, looking in through the glass with a mixture of admiration and longing, and the quiet and devastating belief that the people inside that world are somehow fundamentally different from themselves, somehow made of different material, somehow born with something that was not given to the rest of us. And the entire point of Estée Lauder's life, the single most important thing her story is trying to tell you, is that this belief is a lie. It is the most expensive lie you will ever choose to believe, and you are paying for it every single day that you let it stand. She was not different from you in the ways that matter. She was born into uncertainty just as you were. She was told no, just as you have been. She felt afraid just as you feel afraid. She looked at the distance between where she was and where she wanted to be, and felt the weight of that distance just as you feel it now. The difference was not in what she felt. The difference was in what she did with what she felt. She took the fear and the rejection and the uncertainty and the loneliness and the sacrifice, and she built with them. She used them the way a fire uses wood, completely and without waste. And the result was not just a company or a brand or a fortune. The result was a life that meant something, a life that left the world measurably different from how it found it. And that is the standard she is now holding up in front of you. Because the real question that this story has been asking from the very first word is not about Estée Lauder. It was never really about Estée Lauder. It was always about you, about the dream you have been carrying quietly and carefully and sometimes shamefully, as if it were too large to admit to out loud, about the version of yourself that you visit in your most honest moments and then quickly leave, because the distance between that version and your current reality feels too painful to sit with for very long, about the excuses you have perfected over the years, the ones that sound reasonable and mature and practical, the ones about timing and resources and responsibilities and the way the world works, the ones that have kept you exactly where you are, while the clock moves forward with a patience and an indifference that should terrify you. Estée Lauder did not have more time than you. She had the same 24 hours that you have today, the same 7 days in every week, the same finite and irreplaceable resource that is being spent right now, whether you are using it or wasting it, whether you are building or waiting, whether you are moving toward the life you actually want or standing still inside a story that stopped being true for you a long time ago. And she chose, every single day, with full awareness of the cost, to use her time as if it were the most precious material she had ever worked with, more precious than any formula in her uncle's laboratory, more precious than any product on any shelf in any store in the world. So this is where the story ends, and where your story either continues or begins. Right here, right now, in this moment after the last word. Because inspiration without action is just entertainment. And you did not come here to be entertained. You came here because something in you is still alive. Something in you still believes that the distance between where you are and where you are meant to be is crossable. And it is. It absolutely is. But only if you move. Only if you decide today and not tomorrow. Only if you take the hunger you feel right now in this moment and refuse to let it cool before you do something real with it. Because the world does not need another person who almost built something great. The world needs you. The complete and committed and fully alive version of you. The one that Estée Lauder proved was always possible. The one that has been waiting, perhaps for too long, to finally begin.